systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 4 live stream for the Sentry. Gonna make sure you're ready for all of your showdown lineups tomorrow. But first off, we'll look at the weather report. We'll go through some shots gained metrics, the stone, give you guys an idea of what to look for in players out there for tomorrow. And then afterwards, some core plays and lineup construction to go ahead and tie it all together. But first off, hopefully you guys are having a fantastic weekend and are ready to talk some golf out here for the final round, which could hopefully lead to some GPP takedowns for the community, hopefully some run good for any outrights that you guys have in the mix out there for tomorrow. But first off, welcome on in. We got Michael down there, Ranger as well, looking for the right chemistry in round 4. Had some solid lineups, but it's hard to. For sure, DFS is a hard thing, but as long as your process is getting better and better, trying to refine it every single time you play, then I think you're doing the right thing. So any questions you've got, go ahead and fire down in chat. You say good luck tomorrow. Hope everyone did better than you today. Yeah, I had a pretty decent day with Sanjay, myself. Guys like Xander went off that were in my core, but definitely a few stinkers as well. So like Ranger said, just got to tune it in a little bit and try and get a lineup with 5 or 6 poppers as opposed to like the 3 or 4 that I had today. I had a lot of lineups that were good, not great. And in DFS, you've got to be great to get a real takedown. So what's going on, Michael? You said you got crushed in Showdown today too. So yeah, a few people out there seem to get crushed, which is going to happen scoring like this. Your guys pretty much had to shoot -7 or better to score. So hey, I wouldn't hang your head down or anything like that. Just try and get better out there for your lineups tomorrow. Before we dive on in, do want to remind you guys of the presenting sponsor for the live stream, which of course are our friends over there at the SHIPIT Nation. They are a great resource for all your needs in DFS, not just what we're going to talk up here in this live stream. We're going to show off a lot of the PGA tools, talk through all of that, but they cover a variety of different sports, including NBA, NHL, MMA. You've got MLB when that comes back around, NASCAR, UFC, just to name a few. So make sure to join up over there on the Nation if you guys haven't already. Great projections, of course, all the experts giving their picks and analysis over there as well, and really a process-based website that is not only going to give you guys the tools that a lot of other websites do, but they're going to focus on your process. They're going to try and make you a better player, and that's the same kind of stuff that I talk about during my content over there on the Gsluke DFS channel, which is why I love to partner here with the SHIPIT Nation. Process-based individuals are how you make a community better, and I'm a big proponent of that as well. So code Luke10 gives you a discount off any membership there with the SHIPIT Nation. But let's go ahead and hop on into the action for Sunday. So in terms of your scoring average, got a lot easier than what we even had for round 2. That was with some moving day pin locations, which as expected were going to be a lot easier, but you also had next to no wind out there for Saturday. Sunday, it's going to change a little bit, not so much with the wind significance or strength, but actually the direction out here for tomorrow. They talked about it on the broadcast, but it's going in a 180 flip compared to what you had for rounds 1 through 3. And that is the quote unquote hard wind that you have around this golf course. So though these forecasts, if I bring up the 5 over here with compare, you can see they're all relatively calm out here for tomorrow. It's going a completely other direction, and it's going to be going against the traditional like path of the golf course. So the way that they were explaining it is that the holes that are downhill, that are longer, where you normally have downhill and downwind aspect, are going to be downhill, but back into the wind. So for example, hole number 7 is an extreme example of it. Hole 18 is the same way, where it's downhill and downwind. Those holes, which play a lot longer if it's into the wind, are going to be a little bit tougher out there for Sunday. So scoring average, I think, is going to get just marginally more difficult, maybe closer to like 4 strokes under par, but I'm not talking about a massive difference, right? It's not going to go from playing 5.5 strokes under par to something like -3 or, -3.5 or something like that. I think -4, maybe even -4.5 is as far as it's going to go out there for Sunday. And that, of course, includes the impact of Sunday pin locations, which usually a little bit more difficult for the final round as well. So going back to the weather, just to show you guys the quote unquote edge for tomorrow, there's not going to be much to squeeze from the weather component. If you take a look at all 5 of these forecasts, they look relatively consistent throughout the day. I would say that this ECM model does have it getting a little bit breezier, closer to 2 or 3 p.m. You've also got this bottom model, the NEM, which goes from closer to like 2-3 miles an hour in the morning to 5 or 6 sustained over there in the PM hours. But unfortunately, we have the same kind of tee time situation for round 4 as what we had out there for round 3. So it's going to be threesomes off of holes 1 and 10 once again, which eliminates any sort of weather edge that we can go after. So it's good that we know that ahead of time now. We don't have to circle back and talk about the tee times towards the end. It does take away that weather correlation, potentially stacking some of the early tee times that a lot of people like to do, though. So it's a little unfortunate from that aspect, not being able to go out there at 150 maxes and play a weather edge, but it does simplify your process for some of your single entries, cash, that sort of thing. So the weather, not going to be something that I'm really focusing on out there for my lineups. I would say if you want to take the first few groups off, maybe they get slightly softer conditions than what you have for those later starters, but I'm not expecting there to be really any difference when it comes to the scoring. So just want to throw that out there when it comes to the Sunday showdown slate. What I'm more so doing out there for my exposure is first off incorporating some placement points. Those are going to be in play out there for tomorrow, but then looking at just regular old shots gained metrics, whether it's using the stone, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, or going through regular shots gained on one of these databases. You want to find players that have a sustainable skill set heading into the final round. So we're going to go through the shots gained metrics through rounds 1 through 3. We'll take a look at some of the round 3 poppers as well to give you guys a good taste for how guys are playing heading into Sunday so that you can try and make your player pool. So by the way, for DFS, I think it's a good time to cover this right now. Placement points are going to be a factor for Sunday, but at a birdie fest like this, -5.5 scoring average like we had for round number 3, it is minimized compared to some of the other events on tour. The complete opposite of this kind of event, of course, would be like the US Open, where it plays 1 or 2 strokes over par. That kind of event, placement points are of the utmost importance on the Sunday, as they make up a vast majority of the points that you're scoring on that slate. You know, when the average score, a good score is 1, maybe 2 under par, those 12 to 10 points you're getting towards the top end of the board are going to be massive out there in your contest. So, and in this kind of field where you're playing to a well under par scoring average, it's the exact opposite. It's not like it's a complete non-factor at -5.5, but it makes up a smaller percentage of the score out there for Sunday. So you don't want to fixate out there on those placement points. So that's why we're going to look through some of these poppers, try and find players that are starting perhaps just a little bit further back that still have some top 10 upside, maybe even top 5 upside if they have a good day, and that are hitting the ball in a very sustainable fashion. Let me get a sip of coffee. Let's catch up on the chat and figure out what we're doing. Posted, not great. Yeah, you're going to miss on a few guys, that's for sure. All your lines suck today. Unfortunate to hear, guys. Annoying when you see somebody like Zaynut show up on the Sims and ignore it. Yeah, that happens. There's definitely going to be guys that you see as good plays that you overlook, especially if you're not a 150 max player. So, hey, just look at the Sims next time. Maybe try and take them more seriously when you're looking at it. He said, who's the dusty player for round 4? I've got 4 core plays you might want to keep an eye on. So let's go through this. So the stats out here for round 4, I usually like to get a good taste heading into Sunday for not only how guys have played over the first 3 days, but also how they played for just round 3 in particular. So we're going to start off with the first 3 rounds. And the first thing I want to go through on here is the shots gained to ball striking. So this is usually the most sustainable aspect of the golf game. It includes shots gained off the tee and shots gained on approach. And what I'm looking for here are poppers, which you're going to see guys on the top 5 showing up here, but also guys that are starting just outside that top 5. So no surprise, you got Hideki, Colin Morikawa at 1 and 2 when it comes to your shots gained ball striking, but you got McNeely there at 3. He's starting in T9. You got Vegas starting in T15, and then also Cam Davis, who's in that T9 position over there in 5th. So these guys like a McNeely, a Cam Davis, even a Johnny Vegas that are starting outside of that top 5, they're going to be owned. They're not going to be low-owned guys like you have for the players at the bottom of the leaderboard, but you're going to have slightly lower ownership on those players outside the top 5 compared to some of that mega chalk towards the top end of the board. And I would argue that these sort of players that have gone to this point of the week with their ball striking have a much better chance of repeating that out there for Sunday than players that luck boxed around the green, that went out there, made 5 strokes putting when they're a pretty average putter for most weeks. I more so want these stripers, these ball strikers that have been dialed in for the first 3 days. So that's what we're getting in this category. Just to dive a little bit deeper into the weeds when it comes to the ball striking stats, they've got guys like Harry Hall, Sun GM there at like 6 and 7. You got Thomas Dietrich also having a relatively impressive week. It's a lot of guys towards the top end of the board. So there's not a lot of guys here that are really surprising us. If we go down a little bit further, you got an Aubert who's there at T21. And then you also have players like a McIntyre and Aaron Rye, who's T26. A Max Homa, who's also there at T26, that haven't had the most impressive week, but they've at least been solid over the first 3 days. And at T26, if they go out there and give us a ceiling round, they've got a legit chance to crack that top 10. And when it comes to placement points, they matter, but they're not the end all be all. If you're a player starting at T26, shooting -7, -8 tomorrow, that gets you up there into the top 10. That's going to outscore probably some of the other guys that finish in the top 10 that only go out there and shoot something like -5 or -6. So again, what I'm more so worried about with these players for Sunday isn't where they're starting on the board. It's how they've played to this point of the week. And the added benefit of taking guys that are closer to T18 or T26 is that they're not going to be nearly as highly owned as some of these guys towards the top end of the board. So that's over the first 3 rounds, at least when it comes to shots gained ball striking. If we want to take a look at some of the guys that have just been filling it up with the putter, Cam Young looks very unsustainable. He's lost strokes on approach to this week, but he's gained a bunch of the putter. So he's going to be a fade for me out there tomorrow. Tony Finau, the same thing, also losing on approach, has gained 5.5 strokes putting. That is just not something that I think he can continue going into Sunday. Going down the list a little bit further, you got Corey Connors up there too. That's also a massive red flag in my opinion. Christian Bezuidenhout, I don't worry about as much because he is a really good putter. Will Zalatoris, though, is another one of those red flag players that you wouldn't expect to see towards the top end of that putting list. So it's a few of the guys that we had up there in round 1 as well. You can see you had Cam Young up there, Finau, also Zalatoris that popped out there in round 1, but they've kept it going throughout the rest of the week as well. So those are some of the players, at least the bad putters that we pointed out as red flags, that you might want to consider staying away from out there for Sunday just because they're putting way above their baseline. We can also look at around the green over the first 3 days, guys that are maybe chipping in a few too many times. I think Cam Young, especially at T9, is the one guy to look out for. Maybe a Grazerman or a Sun Jam as well. And then if we take a look at some of the guys that have lost a bunch of strokes around the green, maybe to find guys that have gone maybe a little bit unlucky in that category, or that if they go out there and sharpen up the ball striking, can have a much better Sunday, which because by the way, if you have really good ball striking stats, you're going to have less opportunities to lose strokes around the green, which could help somebody like Akshay. He's lost 5 strokes to this point of the week. In Eckroat, who's lost over 3 strokes when it comes to his around the green play. Now, Hovland, pretty shoddy when it comes to the chipping. So maybe he doesn't fix that out there on Sunday, but in Mav McNeely, we could say a lot of the same things about. So those are some of the stats I'm looking at over the first 3 rounds. In terms of round 3 in particular, I want to look at approach stats. I want to know who was throwing darts out there for moving day. So at the top of that list, we had Nick Taylor, who gained 5 strokes approach. Colin Morikawa, 4 strokes approach himself, is some good stuff out there for Morikawa. You have a lot of predictable guys like Harry Hall had a good day. Same thing with Matsuyama. You'd expect to see them towards the top of that list, but look at Max Homa. Like I said, looked a lot better the last few starts that we've seen. A few on the DP World Tour. This week over here on the state side, he's gained over 2 strokes on approach in round 3. If we keep going through it, Ryan Harmon had a bounce back day. He had been dreadful the first few rounds. Will Zalatoris had solid approach play. So though he's been carrying himself with the putter a little bit, at least he's still hitting the ball solidly. You got a Cam Davis there who we'll talk about here in a few minutes. And Akshay Bhatia had a bounce back round himself. I do want to do a little bit of a deep dive into Bhatia here, because he has the kind of stat profile that I think is really positive heading into Sunday. So round 1, he lost 3.5 strokes around the green and gained all his strokes to the putter. So that was just kind of like a okay round because he made a bunch of putts. Round 2 is where it all fell apart. So it looked sketchy round 1. Round 2 is where that really came to a head. You saw him not have his best day. And then round 3 today, he goes out there, he gains on approach, he gains off the tee. He doesn't gain with the putter, but he goes out there and has a respectable performance. Not what he was hoping for, a little bit worse than the field average, But heading into Sunday, he went from sketchy days 1 and 2 to a lot more sustainable out there on Saturday. He's the kind of guy at super low ownership because he's T41. No one is going to play him out there in lineups. He's also a little bit overpriced heading into the final round as well. He's the kind of guy you throw out there into a lineup and you have instant leverage out there to the rest of the field. So you're going to have to take placement points at some spot. Like, you're going to need the winner between Hideki and Colin Morikawa. I think it's almost a certainty that one of those two wins. If not, it's going to be somebody coming from way behind. Well, not way behind. Probably like a Dietrich or a Sanjay that shoots something like -11 again. But unless they go nuclear low, it's probably one of those top two guys that are playing. You're going to have a piece of chalk is what that means if you're playing one of those two. I've got both a Hideki and a Colin Morikawa at over 40% projected ownership. That's why in Akshay Bhatia, somebody starting a lot further back, but that has breadcrumbs of them having some success out there on Sunday, or at least a chance, some sort of stats that show that they're figuring it out as the week goes on. That's why those players are important, right? You're going to have your guys towards the top, your studs, your Cam Davises, your McNeelys that are really hitting the ball well, but you're also going to have to mix in a few really ugly plays to offset that ownership too. Speaking of the stone, which, by the way, is my favorite tool that they have over here at SHIPIT Nation, they really make it easy to go through all this research. So this is actually the round 4 stone. This is for Sunday, so I cannot scroll down and show you guys anything else. There are a few names up here towards the top that I guess can give you a taste for what they have to offer, but they've got their projections on there. You've got ownership towards the top end of the board. You can see that they have Colin Morikawa and Hideki also over 40% ownership up there with those top few players. But what I'm really worried about and why I really like the stone is you can take a look at their round 3 performance. You can take a look at their true approach numbers, try and find guys that are likely to regress to their means out there on Sunday. You can take a look at their bad round regression, their round 4 historical data, as I mentioned. And then over here on the right, you've also got the true putting that you can deep dive. So all of these stats take a lot of what we just did over here on the shots gained profiles and make it a little bit easier to read. So, it's a little bit different of a way of going out there and evaluating these players. It's just a different way to go out there and try and find poppers. But I really like what they're doing over there. I incorporate it into my own process all the time. So if you guys join SHIPIT Nation, make sure to use code Luke10, as I was saying before, and they'll give you that discount off any sort of subscription. I do want to talk through my core plays now. So I'll bring up my projections, which these are separate to what we have on the SHIPIT Nation. So just know that like the ownership numbers on here are not reflective of SHIPIT. This is the Gsluke Patreon page that you're seeing on here. But I do want to go through 4 plays that I'm using for Sunday, that just to give you a little peek behind the veil, right? Show you what I'm looking for in players, which doesn't mean that you have to use these players, right? Just because I'm using them in your lineups does not mean that you have to use them yourself, right? That's not the point of this. This is a process-based show. We spend a lot more time talking about the why rather than the who out there for Sunday, and the why is always a lot more important than the who. So just if you agree with these sort of plays, obviously you can use them yourself. You're the creator of your own lineups. You have your own prerogative out there for Sunday. But at the same time, if you don't agree with one of these plays, like, you should actively avoid them, right? If you don't think that my take on a player is something that you agree with, then go a different direction, right? That's perfectly respectable. And in fact, a lot of you out there probably should be, right? There's these aren't locks out here for Sunday. Let's just make that abundantly clear. But some of the comments I just wanted to say about. So let's go through a few of the plays on here as usual. So up here towards the top, we have Hideki Matsuyama at $9,700. He's 46.2% owned, and you're going to have to take some ownership towards the top. I said that Colin, also Hideki, looks like one of those two is almost a lock to win this thing, and you say that because of the ball striking stats. Neither one has blinked to this point. They're gaining across all 4 stat categories. Morikawa has elite course history around here. The difference, though, and this is where I made my determination, doesn't have to be how you're doing it for Sunday, is I look at the mental component of golf. I look at 2 players that are hitting the ball the same. Frankly, long-term form, and both of these players are world-class major champions. It's really hard to distinguish between these two when it comes to their long-term pedigree. What I more so look at, though, is how have they fared on Sundays. Colin Morikawa at this event in the past has crumbled. In fact, a 7-shot lead, he crumbled over there on a Sunday. Hideki, on the other hand, is a stone-cold killer. This is the sort of guy who has had the 36-hole lead 6 times in his career, and he has closed out that 36-hole lead. So after 2 rounds, 3 of the 6 times. Now, he's done it a bunch after 54 holes as well, but I don't have that stat off the top of my head. I imagine, though, that his closing rate is at least that 50% that you had for the 36-hole lead lead, if not even better than that over there for his conversion rate. So, they say certain players are clutch, certain guys just have that it factor. Hideki Matsuyama, when he is playing his best golf, has that it factor out there for his game. So he's the sort of player that I'll be using out there in lineups. 63 projected fantasy points is up there at the top of my rankings for round number 4. And really just the kind of guy I expect to win tomorrow. So I'm going to play him out there in my showdown lineups. So if you think Morikawa's going to win, maybe you think a Sanjay or a Dietrich vaults up the board and takes it, you probably want to use them out there in your showdown lineups. Next up, we got Wyndham Clark here at $9,100. And this is the sort of play that I'm getting a little bit different with. And I stress a little bit different because he's still 14.5% owned, but he's not going to be a mega chalky 46% owned guy like you have up there with Hideki Matsuyama. What I'm more so looking at here with a Wyndham Clark is he had a really big letdown towards the end of his round 3. He ended up making I think it was double on hole number 14. He also didn't birdie any of the 15, which was super easy. Also 18, which is the easiest holes on the golf course. He just didn't take advantage of a lot of the holes that a power hitter like Clark is supposed to take advantage of. But so I see some regression coming for him, right? He's starting from way behind the lead, so he's not going to have that Sunday pressure that guys like Morikawa or Hideki are going to have towards the top. He's going to play free. We've seen him on Sundays make a huge charge up the board before, and while I'm not expecting him to go out there and win like he did at Pebble Beach, I guess that was a round 3 charge that you had for Wyndham Clark there, with them ending that event a little bit early. But Wyndham Clark is capable of posting nuclear rounds because he's not only a solid ball striker when he's playing well, he's the best putter that we have in the world when he's putting his rocks. So at $9,100, he missed a lot of putts today. I was following his round closely as I bet his over on birdies, and he only made 6 out of the 6.5 that I had. So it was a letdown for me, just like he let himself down over there on hole number 14. So you might think that I might hold a little grudge against him, not play him for showdown, but now we're getting lower ownership. He's only $9,100. He's in prime position to move into that top 3, top 5. If he can shoot something like -7 or -8, it gets to that at least that -7 mark. And I have all the confidence that he's at least giving us a solid amount of placement points, plus all the benefits of shooting a -7 round. 2 more plays I want to go through on here, and these ones are a little bit cheaper, but kind of like you had there with Clark, they're not going to be super low owned. These core plays are players that I'm using at higher exposure rates and guys that I'm building around. And for Sunday Showdown, I am building around players that at least have some sort of placement potential. That's not to say, though, just as I was mentioning before, that I'm not going to have some low owned pivots out there in the mix as well. So like Akshay Bhatia, we mentioned before, right? He's one of those lower owned guys that I'm going to be taking a look at out there for Sunday. There are going to be a lot of those sort of players that I'm using as well. But what we're focusing on here are, again, some of the guys I really want to flag plant out there for tomorrow. And Matt McNealy is one of those players. When we were taking a look at the shots gained ball striking stats, he was up there towards the top of the list. In fact, if you go to the shots gained ball striking over rounds 1 through 3, he has gained over 7 strokes ball striking, and this is in one of the best fields that we have of the year, only trailing the 2 guys up there at the top end of the board. So if we're looking for somebody that has a sustainable track record to go out there and repeat on Sunday, it's Matt McNealy, who, by the way, won his last time out there in the PGA Tour, and is also a player that is usually really good putter, and he's usually a really good putter on Bermuda grass in particular. And this week, he has not been making a lot of putts. If you take a look at his track record, he's lost about 2 strokes around the green. He's one of the best short game players that we have on the PGA Tour, and he's a neutral with the putter. Normally, on his best weeks, when he's getting into contention like we have, he's usually gaining like 4 or 5 strokes putting. So I'm not saying he's going to go out there and gain a bunch out there on Sunday. You've still got to have some run good going, right? We've got to hope that he's getting some putts to drop. But if there's somebody that you would play and hope for putts to drop with, Matt McNealy, you could do a whole lot worse than Matt McNealy is what I'm trying to say here. So $7,700, he's 13.5% owned. I actually think I might bump up his ownership in my next run of ownership that I throw on my site. But even if he's like 15 to 17.5% owned, I'm using him out there in my lineups. And the last guy I want to talk through, the last play here, is Cam Davis down here towards the bottom, who just like Matt McNealy has really been hitting the ball well the first 3 days. Going back to that shots gained ball striking tab, he's number 5 in the field at over 5 shots gained out there with the ball striking. His real bugaboo this week has been the putter, but he's lost nearly 1.5 strokes out there on the greens. So Cam Davis, if he can find a way to go out there and just make a few putts on Sunday, that would be massive for him. And just like Matt McNealy, these guys at minus 18, all you have to do, shoot minus 6, minus 7, and that could very well be a top 3 or top 5 finish. So 9.2% ownership. I've got him a little bit lower owned. Just like a Matt McNeely, I'm probably going to have to bump up his ownership a little bit. I'm thinking closer to like 12, 13% out there in my final set. But at a 50.5 fantasy point projection, he far outpaces pretty much every other player in this range. And I guess to give you guys a few like bonus picks that I'm using out there for tomorrow, a Johnny Vegas, a really good ball striker that I'm getting to as well. He's number 4 on the shots gained ball striking list. So just under 7 shots gained out there with his ball striking to this point. Another guy I'm using for a little bit of leverage, he's at minus 17 as well. So the kind of guy, if he has that good round, is not only giving us those raw points, they could also give us those placement points on top of that. And then who else? I'll give you guys one more. Let's go towards the bottom. I'm also using a Kevin Yu, and Kevin Yu is just a good scorer. He's not so much like the ball striking stats for Kevin Yu. It's more so that he's a very aggressive player, and you got to find spots to get different to the field. So I mentioned Akshay as a play before. Sometimes you just want to take a shots on a high upside player out there like Kevin Yu. Let me see if there's any specific questions on players. Now is the great time for that. I'm going to bring up Bet the Number because with player questions, that's usually my go-to is to go through the shots gained metrics over the first few days. So I'll bring that up and let's see what we can do. Where are we at? All your lines suck today. Yep. Okay, dude. And he said, take more seriously. You best be joking. I don't know what you're referring to, Mike, but I think you just need to take a chill pill, man. Did you see anyone have disaster shots that's not likely to sustain? That's a good question. I didn't have enough time to actually go through like hole by hole for every single player. Off the top of my head, Homa, he hit one out of bounds on 14. Actually, it was into a hazard. So not necessarily out of bounds, but a shot that cost him at least 1.5 strokes, if not 2 right there. Wyndham Clark did the same thing. Justin Thomas had a similar play on 14 as well. So that hole is, I think, where most of those kind of shots would have happened. And then 18, Davis Riley hit one way left, which pretty much played OB. He had to pretty much re-tee. He hit his second shot from one of like the up tee boxes. Those are the kind of spots that I would be looking at for that, but I haven't done the full deep dive myself. So a few examples there, but I'd be looking at 14 and 18 mostly for those. Any thoughts on some of the round 2 poppers? So I gave you some of the round 3 poppers. We could look at round 2 if you wanted to. Connors had a disaster second shot in 18. Good call. I didn't think about the second shot there too. Off the top of my head, Adam Hadwin also did the same thing. And maybe it's a Canadian thing on Sunday. Maybe they got some stats from somebody that was wrong on how to approach that pin. I'm just kidding about that, obviously. But yeah, Adam Hadwin had some trouble there too. Who's on a heater that can't keep it up? Already know not to play Harman, who's clearly over his head. Yeah, I agree with that. Harman had his good round today, so you probably want to stay away from that. I think those guys we were looking at with the putting really fit that kind of question. So if you're talking about like an unsustainable skill set, it's usually guys like a Cam Young, a Tony Finau, a Corey Connors up there towards the top that aren't usually the best putters on the PGA Tour, but that fell into a little bit of luck this week. So I would say those kind of guys. Zalatoris, I'd throw into that as well. And then even a Hideki, a Colin Morikawa, they've definitely putted better than they usually do, but they're also hitting the ball so well that even if they do regress to the mean with their putter, they're probably still going to have a good day. The players that you really worry about with that would be like a Cam Young, who's losing a bunch on approach. Same thing with Finau, for example, who's losing a bunch on approach. I don't worry as much about Zalatoris because he's at least been positive in the ball striking categories, but some of those guys towards the top. Who would I pick with the best historic round 4 performance between Sanjay, Morikawa, and Hideki? So the historic round 4 performance sites, I'm going to have you go and check the SHIPIT Nation Stone for that. I can't give away all their stuff for free here on the channel, of course. I would just say that if you're just looking at the best closer between those 3 players, to me, it's Hideki Matsuyama. I don't know if the stats 100% bear that out, but I can tell you like in contention round 4 scoring that I'd rather have Hideki Matsuyama. What's the heater you're nervous about or who's on the heater? Yeah, those guys are just talked about, I would say. Do I see an advantage to starting on 10 or starting on 1? That's a really good question. So let's take a look at the scoring. That's usually the best way to do this. 1 looks like it could stump some people who are trying to get some streaks, and 18's a par 5. So My hunch is that starting on 1 is better out there for a streak, at least if we're taking a look at the averages from today. Because if you started on 1, 9's a par 5, so you're starting probably with a birdie right there. Maybe you pick one off at 8 and you have birdie number 2 out there at 9. 10 played 0.44 strokes under par. So whether you're getting one at 8, 9, then 10, or 9, 10, and then maybe picking one off at 11, which is a shorter par 3, it feels like it's easier to birdie these 3 holes or even 8 through 10, as opposed to if you start on the back 9 and then you flip back to 1, because 16, 17, 18, that's available no matter which side you start on. That's an easy stretch of holes. But really, if you're starting on the back 9, what we're looking at is what's going to happen around 1, right? That's what's really applicable out there to the guys starting on 10. And because 1 and even 2 is pretty hard depending on pin location, we'll have to see what they're doing out there for Sunday. I think I'd rather have guys starting on 1 just because you're ending on a par 5 and then you're starting your other side. Like if we go back to round number 2, they didn't play as easy as what we had for round 3. They still played significantly under par. So yeah, starting on hole 1, I would say would be slightly advantageous, but it's not a big enough difference to stack, in my opinion. Like if you need to break a tie, then you can use it. Who is most likely to have a nosedive tomorrow? So we'll look at the top end of the board, and I'll give you a candidate for it. There are a few guys that kind of come to mind off the top of my head, but if we're just using the pure stats to go through this, I mean, Dietrich looks like he's kind of in a sketchy position. And heck, even Sungjae Im, because he's slightly losing on approach. I would say Dietrich would be the prime candidate for it, though, just because he is a little bit more inexperienced than some of the other players up top. But if we go down a little bit further, I don't know if Cam Young could really qualify as a nosedive just because he's only in T9, where he's not up there in the top 3 like you had with Dietrich. But he's lost 4 strokes on approach, and he's gained all those strokes of the putter. That is a very, very sketchy shots gained record. That is the kind of shots gained record that reeks like fade out there in props, that reeks fade out there from 3 balls and 2 balls and that kind of stuff. I will say this will probably keep his ownership a lot lower. People looking at these shots gained metrics and going, wow, Cam Young is just completely lucked out this week, is probably going to keep his ownership lower than it otherwise would be. So yeah, Cam Young or Dietrich to answer your question there. All right, let's go through some lineup construction stuff. So we're going to go over here to DraftKings, try and build a few lineups here together, just to give you guys an idea of what I'm thinking through when I'm actually clicking players' names. It's not just randomly clicking guys out there from my player pool, especially on a Sunday when we have the placement points. You want to start thinking more showdown-wise, like you'd be thinking out there for NFL. You start thinking about game scripts. You want to start thinking about your potential winner out there in your showdown lineup, as opposed to just going out there and making sure that you have enough leverage out there with your 6 players. On a showdown slate like this, you want at least 1-2 guys that are finishing in the top 3, top 5, if not 3 or 4, like you have out there in major championships. The reason I say 1 or 2 out there on this kind of slate is because we have a birdie fest at hand. You don't necessarily have to go out there and score like all your points with your placement. You don't have to win or finish in second to guarantee yourself a spot in the optimal lineup like you might have to in a US Open, PGA Championship, last round, that sort of thing. So you probably only need 1 or 2 players they're going to give you that leverage. So, those placement points, I should say. Leverage, you probably want like 3 or 4 guys out there for your Sunday lineups. So let's do that. So I'm going to throw Hideki in here. I'm going to assume that he wins by doing so. If you want to start off with Morikawa, that is totally fine. If you want to do it with a Sungjae, a Dietrich, obviously pick whoever you guys want out there in your lineups. But I think it's best to start with who you think is going to go out there and win on Sunday. Your next player, in my opinion, is another guy that you think is going to finish in the top 5. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down here and throw Cam Davis out there into my lineup. So I'm getting a player that's a little bit cheaper. So I'm saving some salary on top of going out there and getting a guy who can finish in the top 5, and also a player that's a little bit lower owned. So I've got one piece of chalk, one guy that's average to maybe even slightly below average ownership out there with Cam Davis. I'm also going to throw in one more guy that at least has top 10 potential. This doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's finishing top 3 or even top 5, but somebody that's at least close enough to the top to get us 3 or 4 placement points, something like that. So let's find somebody in like the -12 to -14 range. Just off the top of my head, I don't remember my entire player pool off the top of my head, but let me just double check that actually on the other tab. So just give me 1 second, guys. Wrong one there. I brought up the version that had the censored ones on it, but there we go. So we're looking for somebody like minus 12, maybe like minus 14 to go out there and plug in. So a little bit of leverage, I would say, but still somebody that could get us some placement points. So we're gonna take JT Poston, who, by the way, seems like people were angry at in chat, but yeah, I forgive and forget rather quickly out there with these players. So I'm gonna throw JT Poston out here into this lineup. Somebody that looked really good heading into the week. A lot of people played for a reason heading into this event. Obviously has not had his best stuff over the first 3 days. Heck, today didn't really look his best either, but because he played so well the first 2 rounds at T36 minus 10, he's a little bit further back to that minus 12 that I was really hoping to find, but he's out of the position here. He shoots minus 7, minus 8. That's going to get you close to that top 10 finish. So that's really what I'm looking for in some of these players with their placement points. Isn't even that top 3, top 5. Sometimes the top 10's enough if they go out there and give us those kind of score that we're looking for. So we're also getting low ownership if we take Poston out there in the lineup. And then for our last 3 players, we've got 86.3 remaining. I don't want to say you can play whoever you want, but we've already got our placement points in. Now we're just worried about taking guys that we think are going to score well. So I'm going to throw a Wyndham Clark out there into this lineup. I'm going to throw an Akshay Bhatia in. Bhatia, of course, had the good shots gained record out there for today. Could perhaps keep that heading into Sunday. Wyndham Clark, hopefully we get some positive regression out there with his putter. And then for our last man in here, Cam Young's a fade for me. I already told you guys I'm probably not using him, but like a Pendrith, if you want to save some salary, maybe leave $400 on the table and go down to a McNeely, you could make this lineup work easily. And you don't have to make it a McNeely who also has placement point potential. It could be a Henley. It could even be a Davis Thompson if you really like him out there for Sunday, that you're using as your last man in here. You've got plenty of placement points already accounted for in this lineup. If you wanted to add one more spot where you could have a top 5, top 10, I don't think it's something that you have to avoid as long as you have enough leverage out there in your lineup. And because we don't have Matsuyama and Morikawa together, I didn't go Matsuyama or Morikawa and then go Sanjay as my second man in. We're not playing any of the guys like a Dietrich up there towards the top either, because I'm getting leverage off a lot of those other chalky players. Like even if we took McNeely as our last man in, we left the $400 on the table, you'd probably be fine with this out there in the large field GBP. You'd have enough leverage. The $400 is going to help you get different as well. And you're going to have 3 or 4 spots out there in this lineup where you could have guys finishing in the top 10. Poston might not get the whole way there. Same thing with Akshay Bhatia, right? Like they might not actually crack the top 10, but if they're shooting something like -6 or better, -7, -8, even better out there for tomorrow, that's really all we care about out there in our showdown lineup. So that's how I'm building out there for Sunday. You need your winner, probably need at least a few more top 5, top 10s. And then your last 2-3 spots are kind of at your discretion. I would say for large field GBPs, your last 2-3 spots, you might want to look for pivots just to try and get even more different in those large field GBPs. If you're in a single entry, you're in a smaller field GBP, maybe you don't get as crazy about it, right? Maybe you don't go out there and play pivots for your last 2-3 spots. That's where that guy like Wyndham Clark, right? He was more of a reasonable play that we could get to. Mav McNeely, same thing, right? He's up there towards the top 2. If you're in a single entry or a smaller field GBP, you don't have to get as different as those large field GBPs, so you don't have to force in crazy plays for your last few spots. So that's what I'll say about the lineup construction. If you're playing cash, Sunday Showdown, you really do want to prioritize a lot of those placement points. Cash beating 50% of the field is a completely different prospect than going out there and playing in a large field GPP. So if I was playing in cash, Hideki Sungjae would almost for sure be in my lineup. Who else? A McNeely, I'd have a hard time not playing Cam Davis. And guys like Corey Connors with his bounce back. Like I'd be looking for ball strikers, guys that have hit the ball well with their ball striking to this point of the week. And then just players that are cheaper than they should be. So like, for example, Cam Davis, $6,700, McNeely at $7,700, Hideki at $9,700 are probably all at least $1,000 too cheap. So that's why I'm jamming those kind of players into my lineups. All are starting up there in the top 10. Cash, like I said, a little bit different than those large field GPPs. You're more so worried about taking guys towards the top as opposed to taking taking all that leverage in some of those mid-tier guys like you're taking out there in GPPs. That's all I've got though out there for the round 4 live stream out here for the Sentry. Still early in the year, you guys can tell I'm still getting my feet under me out here for this season, but best of luck out there with all of your lineups for tomorrow. Smash that like button for me over here on the SHIPIT Nation YouTube channel, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. Let's see if there's any last second questions. Looks like there are out here on Denny McCarthy. We'll go through that, and then we're going to hop on out of here. So let's go through Denny and some of his stats to this point. So I already know that the stats haven't been great, but they haven't been horrible if we take a look at the first 3 rounds. And it's been a very surprising record, I would say. So if you look at his off the tee and approach numbers, he is slightly into the positive, but around the green in his putting, which are normally his big strengths in his game, he's losing 1.7 strokes around the green and losing over 2.5 strokes with the putter. So that's over 4 strokes that he's lost in the 2 categories that are normally well into the positive for him. It's a very risky play if you were to use Denny McCarthy. But what I'll say is that if you're hoping for him to regress back to what you normally see, that would be very beneficial for him in this kind of scenario. Because if he continues to hit the ball like this, which it's not really impressing us, but it'd be good enough if his ball strike, if his short game was there, he gets back to gaining strokes around the green, the putting, he could be in for a really big Sunday. So I would say if you're playing in a large field GPP, you need to find somebody to get different to the field with, that he's a really good player to do it with. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got out there for Sunday. Appreciate you guys stopping by and enjoying the content as per usual. Make sure to subscribe, as I said before. Best of luck out there with all of your Sunday exposure, whether it's out there in the large field GPPs, any bets, outrights that you guys have running, that you run good out there on Sunday. And I hope to see a lot of the SHIPIT Nation logos up there towards the top of the GPPs. Go ahead, use code Luke10 if you guys haven't joined the SHIPIT Nation for a discount off your membership when you join there. And best of luck out there for tomorrow.